Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn and welcome to the ROKER RAPPORT podcast in association with the Sunderland Community Soup Kitchen. As we reflect on a playoff semi-final first leg, that gives us a bit of a mountain to climb on Saturday in the second leg at the Stadium of Light. And to help me go through it is someone who you may well have brought the action to many of you as he was on the scene commentating for BBC Radio Newcastle. It is of course Nick Barnes. Hi Nick.
Hello.
Good to speak with you.
You can tell by my tone, can't you? Well.
yeah, we were saying just before we kind of started recording that I'm struggling to kind of, get the impetus and energy to go through it all again. But I imagine it was a quiet trip back from Lincoln after the game.
Yes, it was. I think we were a little bit lost for words. I was just thinking back then to the end of the game, and because there were fans in the stadium, it made a huge difference to the atmosphere. And clearly, all around us, the Lincoln fans were absolutely buzzing, and I was just sort of deflated. I just sort of stood there waiting for them to exit the stadium because they weren't allowed to go out straight away, which is another strange sort of result of all this COVID and the protocol. So you're standing waiting for 3, 4, 5 minutes before the home fans started to disperse, and you had to sort of time to reflect them. But I just felt a little bit like a pop balloon. I just felt absolutely deflated because I didn't see that result coming. Actually, I mean I'd had fears of a Oxford Blackpool sort of result, and there were periods in the last 15-20 minutes of the game when I honestly did fear that Lincoln could get a third and it would be well and truly all over. And so praying that either Sunderland got one or, heaven forbid, 2 goals back last night, but certainly didn't concede a third. And so it was all a bit mixed. I mean, it was just, on one hand, I was feeling that, look, there is still a chance. There's hope. But on the other side of it was this sort of real deflation, just sort of being like I'd just been slapped in the face. It was odd, very strange.
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt in the house, feeling like I've been slapped in the face. But just because you touched on it, and we'll probably circle back to it before we get to the end, but just because you mentioned it there, I mean, talking about hope, I mean, some of it we might cling to the fact, that celebration after the game seemed to be a prolonged celebration, which, on the psychological side, hopefully, it might kind of lull Lincoln into thinking they've already done it, and they were kind of celebrating so much last night. They might forget there's a second leg. Yeah,
it was interesting because driving back late on, actually, it was on 5 Live. I heard Colin Murray had a Lincoln fan on and a Sunderland fan on to sort of dissect the evening. And I was actually quite surprised by the Lincoln fans' response. I thought he would be fairly gung-ho and very upbeat with a 2-0 win and thinking or assuming that they were probably, pretty much favourites to get to Wembley. And in fact, it was quite the reverse. I think by the tone of the Lincoln fans' sort of conversation, I think they felt last night was almost a one-off, and they still felt that there was not necessarily this isn't over. And I think he was probably an exception because I think I get the impression from the Lincoln fans in the stadium that they felt now it is all over. I think they feel that they've done the job. So I think you're right. There may be an element of Lincoln feeling job done, and I know Marco Gabbiadini always shoots us down in flames when you say 2-0's a dangerous lead, but it is. And I think, proof of that was Accrington the other week. I think 2-0 is a dangerous lead. I think there is a danger that Lincoln, from their perspective, can come into the game and think, right, all we need to do is keep things tight. And, the longer it goes 2-0, or if we can sneak one, then we're through. But if Sunderland score, if they can get that first goal, it does change the tie. I don't think there's. Yeah. I'm not sort of clutching at straws here. I'm not trying to be overly optimistic. But if Sunderland score first and it's 1-2, then they're back in it. And it's interesting that Lee Johnson in his post-match last night was talking in terms of if we can get to extra time and penalties. Now, is that his thinking? I hope not. I'd want it wrapped up in the 90 minutes. I'd like to see them score 3 goals and beat Lincoln, convincingly in that manner. But it sort of portrayed in his own mind, and perhaps an admission that he this. I mean, on the one hand, he's saying we've got goals, we can score 2, 3, 4, 5 goals. I'm not absolutely entirely convinced that's the case. On the other hand, he's talking about getting it to extra time. Now, I to my mind, that's a betrayal that he actually hasn't got 100% faith that his squad is a goal machine. So it's all about tactics. It's all about making sure you don't concede the first goal at the Stadium of Light, because that, again, will completely change the tie.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's go into last night's game, because that might help us go on to Saturday. And there's another couple of comments I want to kind of ask you about that Lee Johnson made that were quite interesting. But let's go into last night's game first. And even before a ball was kicked, I mean, a lot was made of the inclusion of Tom Flanagan at the back. I mean, what did you make of that before kickoff? Because, you know, he's been out of the scene, he's had an injury, question marks whether he's fully fit. To throw him into such a big game when, okay, that partnership of Bailey Wright and Luke O'Nien were faltering, but they still had some sort of a partnership. And so what was kind of made of it before kickoff?
Well, interestingly, we'd had a conversation at lunchtime about that whole scenario. And my take on it was, I think to a certain extent, Lee Johnson's risk averse. So I didn't think he would risk Tom Flanagan. I think he's been, the question I put to Lee on Monday ahead of this game was, do you play Tom Flanagan because it's a risk and it's a gamble? And that's not something he sort of denied or played down or played up. I think he was playing his cards close to his chest on Monday, because I think he probably had it in the back of his mind, well, he obviously did, that Flanagan was going to play, and he didn't want Michael Appleton to get wind of that. But my issue with it is, and I think you've sort of hinted there, is that for all the deficiencies in O'Nien and Wright at the moment, and there are, they have been playing together. They are in a position, where while they may make mistakes, they are the two that have been playing on a regular basis. To throw Tom Flanagan into this, a game of the magnitude to which it is or was really, really risky. It was a big gamble. It clearly didn't work, and I think Lee Johnson, after the game, pretty much admitted that and accepted it. It was a gamble and a risk that he took and didn't work. But I just felt that whilst you've got an issue at the back without question, this whole right back centre back issue, and we know now that Conor McLaughlin's out for the rest of the season. But I was thinking last night, well, what do you if you have got that problem with right back, well, play Power there as you've done before. Take, while it's not ideal, you've still got Scowen, you've got Winchester, you've got Ledbetter. It's not as though you're devoid of options in central midfield. So I just felt, when I saw that, I was surprised when I saw the team sheet. When I saw Flanagan was starting, I actually, took a deep breath, because I thought, look, this is either going to work magnificently or it's going to backfire. It's not going to work. And knowing Sunderland's luck this season with injuries, and proof last night with Hume with his hamstring within 10 minutes, I thought that sort of underlined why it was probably a gamble that wasn't worth taking. Because from my point of view, the first leg is the leg you don't want to lose. You can leave on a 0-0, you can go on a 1-1, you can win the game to take back to the second leg, and there you can do the hard work. But I think, to gamble in the first leg, where, as we saw with Oxford and Blackpool, it can go horribly wrong, was, to my mind, too much of a gamble.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking about keeping on the subject of gambles, I mean, going into that first half was cagey to kind of matching each other up. Lincoln always seemed the most likely to score out the two sides. Burge made a couple of really good saves, actually. At the end of the first half, I was pretty relieved to go in at half time. But we were talking about gambles there. Were you a little bit surprised we weren't more on the front foot? Because, from my point of view in that first half, I couldn't tell if our plan was to press Lincoln or to keep it tight. We didn't seem to have an exact plan. You couldn't see us executing something to say, let's keep the ball or let's get the ball forward quickly. There didn't seem a definitive, this is how we're going to play last night.
I agree with you to an extent. I think at half time, when I had the conversation with Benno, I felt that it was almost a game of two halves. I thought Lincoln did start strongly. I thought for 20 minutes, 25 minutes, they were clearly the dominant side. They were enjoying more possession. They had an outlet with Regan Poole and Brennan Johnson, and Scully. They were clearly hell bent on getting the ball to them. The Hume injury didn't help, and I just felt that I'd accept it in the sense that Lincoln were the home team. They had the fans behind them. They came out to put Sunderland under early pressure. I think to try and get the early goal, and I could see that was what Lincoln, I think, were trying to do. Sunderland didn't seem to have an outlet. I'm still, I know we'll go on to talk about this. Wyke, I felt, was just isolated and didn't get anywhere near the ball. And Lincoln sort of benefited from that in Sunderland's sort of first half play. I thought the second half of the first half, Sunderland started to get on the ball more. They started to get hold of it. They started to get a bit more of a grip. And I think I was sort of happy for them to get to half time at 0-0 in the knowledge that, look, they've played themselves into the game now. And Benno said, well, there's no need to change anything. There's no need to tinker because they are in the game now. And I tend to agree with that. And I think, if I wanted backup for that, was the way they started the second half. I thought they started by far the brighter of the two teams. In a way, they started like Lincoln had started the first half. Had they been lucky enough to score in that spell, well, who knows? It'd have been a different game, perhaps. But, the problem was they didn't. And, Lincoln went down the other end and you have to point the finger at Sunderland's defence because they didn't clear their lines after Burge had made, a respectable save from George Grant. But for Grant to get a second opportunity then, which led to the goal, well, then that was negligent, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right in that second half. I had the same feeling that we came out looking much brighter. He'd obviously had words with them, changed a few things in terms of what they were doing and how they were getting the ball forward. Because I thought that, as you said, that was the main issue and how we got the ball forward and, not leaving Wyke isolated or asking Wyke to give us a little bit of movement. But it was only a few minutes into the second half. Bailey Wright, thundered that header against the bar. Probably should have done better. If that had gone down, I think that had gone in. Obviously would have changed the game. But I mean, kind of extending this point out. I mean, I've been banging on the drum for a little while that I don't think that during the bad run that we had, we were playing that much differently to what we were during the good run that we had. The difference was that we had a striker who was in form and we were taking those chances and getting a lead that we could build on. And then we were finishing teams off and winning, getting 3 points. Whereas now, because those goals have dried up, it's when we struggle, the longer the game goes on, and then if the opposition take the lead, the heads start to go down and we kind of lose it and we don't get the result. But in terms of the performances and the way we're playing, getting the ball wide, trying to get the ball in, I don't think there's that much difference. It's just we've never blown teams away. We've never been fantastic in this division this season. It's just a case of we're not taking the lead, we're not building that confidence up.
I don't disagree, and I think if you when you look back, Sunderland finished fourth. Funnily enough, at the start of the season when we did our predictions for Total Sport at work, I said Sunderland would finish fourth on the basis I just didn't believe that the squad that Sunderland had was dynamic, if you like, for want of a better word, in the same way that Hull's and Peterborough's have proved to be, and Peterborough's actually especially. And I mean, at the start of the season, we didn't have any idea under Phil Parkinson that Charlie Wyke was going to be the striker he turned out to be this season. And, whilst there's some criticism, probably quite rightly, to be levelled at Lee Johnson in certain areas, one area where I think he can be applauded is the fact that he did get Charlie Wyke scoring goals again. He rebuilt Charlie Wyke, the $6 million man. But, and without that, where would Sunderland have finished? There is a serious question to be asked there. Without Charlie Wyke's goals, take them out of the equation, then Sunderland would have probably struggled to even make the playoffs. So I think that for me, watching Lincoln last night, one player in the end actually stood out and started to run the show, if you like, and that was George Grant. And you looked at the way he played, the way he got on the ball, the way he caused Sunderland's problems, I just think we come back to this every season. Sunderland don't seem to be able to get hold of or sign a player of that ilk who can dominate midfield. Again, we've been anonymous, I think, in midfield in a lot of games. Whilst there's been a lot of good play, that's down largely, I think, to when players like Jordan Jones is having a good game, or McGeady's been able to get on the ball and has not been marked out of the game. When Gooch, McGeady, have all got closer to Jones and they caused problems in the opposition penalty area. And when you looked at the team sheet last night, I looked at the attacking third, and I thought, well, actually, that's fine. We sort of touched on the defence, but I think the other end of the field, I looked at that team sheet and thought, well, fine, I'm happy with that. Jones, McGeady, Gooch, White. For me, that was a solid attacking unit if they could get the ball into White's feet, into the Lincoln penalty area. And all credit to Lincoln, they did an effective job in shutting Sunderland out. But I echo what you say about those performances when they went on that 7-match run without a win. The Wigan match aside, they were pretty much toe to toe with Blackpool, bar one amazing strike in the game at the Stadium of Light, bar a mistake at Bloomfield Road where they were gifted a goal, if you like. But always felt that those two games were always going to be one goal in it, and as it happened, Blackpool got that one goal on both occasions. The other games, again, Charlton, were Sunderland a better side on the day? Probably were, but Charlton just had that. It was running with them that day, and the shortcomings of Sunderland's squad become apparent when things aren't quite running for you. That's where you need that, looking forwards in terms of recruitment, that's where you need to look at where you're going to find that 10%, which those other teams at the moment seem to have.
For me, you've touched on it there, that, you talking about the resurgence of Charlie Wyke under Lee Johnson, but, you could argue that it was the resurgence of Aidan McGeady that kind of played into that. And what Lee Johnson did, because, yes, Phil Parkinson, he had the record that he had, and it's, on paper, I think I haven't kind of looked at the exact numbers, but I think it's fairly similar to Lee Johnson, actually. But the difference was, I think, with Phil Parkinson, he got us, completely solid at the back, and we kept possession probably so much to our detriment that we didn't end up making any chances. And Lee Johnson's changed things that we create more chances, but that means there's more risk going the other way when we can concede. And as you said, he got White going, which partly down to bringing McGeady back in. But the issue is, when you have a striker like Charlie White up front, you do become one-dimensional, and you become reliant on that, on those partnerships, the Jones to White, McGeady to White, Gooch to White. And it's all about getting the ball in and, getting the ball wide and getting the ball into the box. And, it doesn't take a genius, if you're an opposition manager, if you watch Sunderland, to say, okay, well, we'll double up out wide and stop them getting the ball into the box. And what else have they got?
I agree with you. And I think you're right. In McGeady coming back in, when Lee Johnson's right, you don't leave a player like McGeady to wallow in the under-23s. When you've got a player of his talent, you bring him back into the fold. And as he admits, he can be difficult to man manage. But that was an admission made by Jack Ross and Phil Parkinson. All three of them know or knew that McGeady's a character or a footballer that you have to man manage. Jack Ross managed it. It's just that McGeady got injured. Phil Parkinson didn't. And he isolated him. He ostracised him, I think, to the detriment of the squad, obviously. And Lee Johnson, came in, brought him back in. You're right, they are one-dimensional club. I think, a problem with Phil Parkinson when that run to the end of last season before it was curtailed, I think he was ultra-conservative. Once people had picked up on the fact he was playing the system he was playing and he wouldn't change it, opposition managers within 4 or 5 games sussed it out, and they negated whatever threat Sunderland had. And I think the problem with Lee Johnson is that, to a certain extent, he too is, I mentioned that, risk averse again. And by that, I mean, when you've got a player like Chris Maguire in your squad and you're putting him on the bench, why aren't you using him more? Because we've seen that he can have an impact. He may not be doing everything by the manual, and he's a maverick, but isn't that sometimes what you need? Because that's not what the opposition are expecting. The opposition they know all about Jones. They know all about McGeady. They know all about Gooch. They know exactly what White will give you. But Maguire is an enigma in the sense that, yeah, if you start him on a regular basis, you're going to suffer from inconsistency. You'll get 2 or 3 good games from him, then his form dips. But if you've got him in the right frame of mind and you're using him off the bench, then as we saw, I think a prime example was Crewe, wasn't it, when Jones and Maguire came on? When you use him in that sense, and I would have had an option. My preferred option last night would have been to see Maguire come on for 20 minutes, because I think he's the sort of player that, starts to rough the opposition up. He gets, his set pieces and so on. I just think it's an option, and he's not being used. And I think when the games are as important as they are at the moment, these playoff games, I just felt they missed a trick in not using him.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, you do the obvious look at social media, comments from friends, group chats, whatever. I mean, the thing on it, the biggest frustration with Lee Johnson, people, it's kind of split between the risk in the starting lineup with Flanagan, etc. But the biggest frustration was the substitutions. Now, we went 1-0 down. And we actually picked it up. We were the better side for a 15-20 minute period after that, and we looked like we might get it back and get back on level terms. But after, and we'll come back onto the calamity of the second goal in a minute. But in terms of after we went 2-0 down, I mean, when a goal can change the tie so much, as you said right at the beginning, you can maybe understand Ledbetter to put a foot on the ball, calm things down a little bit, Ross Stewart to stretch the game. But then you still need that moment. You still need that player who can produce that one single moment. Like he did it when he came on a Crewe and changed the game. And he gave us, when he's up for it, he can completely change a game. And it's a big it's a big negative last night that people have put against Lee Johnson's name in terms of those substitutions, and it's put a big question mark on his back, not bringing this enigma on the pitch when you need a moment.
It's interesting because when you speak to Lee Johnson about Maguire, he's adamant, and he's been asked about it several times. He says there's absolutely no issue with Maguire at all. There's no sort of personality problem there. There's no but it constantly, it doesn't chime with why he's not being used, why he's not coming on when we know. And is it because Lee Johnson is very OCD in the way that he sets his teams up, the way that he organises his sort of homework, if you like, for the games? I mean, Benno and I had this long conversation about, it's a frustration, I think, that in the modern game, coaches coach to the manual. And if you don't coach to the manual, you're not going to get in the team. And I think there's an element of that in Lee Johnson, that he, if you like, over coaches. We know all about his desire to have video screens on the training pitch and analysing every kick, every pass, every tackle, every set piece. Well, is there an argument that there's sometimes over-analysis? And and does Maguire not fit in because he's a one player that, we all know what Chris Maguire's like. He's the one player probably isn't receptive to those long, here's the tactics board, here's what you should be doing on the iPad, blah, blah, blah. And that sort of enigmatic part of Chris Maguire is where suddenly the wires go in Lee Johnson's head and he can't cope with that. And so to cope with it, he doesn't play him because it doesn't fit in with his plan. But it is frustrating. And I think last night, I think what we saw in the last 15, 20 minutes again is that Luke O'Nien, look, love him, and he's an absolutely fantastic player to have in your side, but he is headstrong. He's picking up yellow cards on a game-by-game basis now because he gets frustrated. And that's, part of that is this because he's playing out of position and doesn't know where his best position is. And there was an argument we had this before the game last night, that perhaps O'Nien was going to sit in the middle and Power was going to play at right back, because it's maybe more O'Nien's natural position to be in a more central forward position, because he likes to get forwards.
Yeah, well, I mean, just on Maguire, I mean, just to kind of follow your point through, was that, I completely agree. I mean, I think everyone would agree on that point in terms of Lee Johnson and how he probably looks at Chris Maguire. And I think it's certain Chris Maguire won't be at the club next season. He doesn't fit into Lee Johnson's style, how he wants to set up with the right players. But when it comes to 15 minutes left, 10 minutes left, 5 minutes left, you're 2-0 down, and one goal will change absolutely everything. It doesn't become about tactics then. It's about that one moment of genius that someone could come up with. And it doesn't really make a difference if he doesn't follow his man at that point.
No, it doesn't. I can sort of see what was going through Johnson, Taylor, McComb, their minds, is that Luke O'Nien's on a yellow card. You haven't got any other defenders on the bench. You've got to try and calm things down. That's why Ledbetter comes on. At the same time, for all that, you're taking out the bite, if you like. You're risking. You've got a risk that O'Nien might pick up a second yellow card. You've got to, be aware the risk of Lincoln scoring a third. That was, clearly a reality. You know that if you're going to push forward in search of a goal or two goals, you're going to leave the back door open. But that's where you've got, I think, sometimes to hold your nerve and say, look, while we are in danger of conceding a third, we have also got the players who can score at the other end and put Lincoln under pressure and give them something different to think about. But I don't think they actually gave Lincoln anything really to think about. They threw Stewart on, but Lincoln had the players to deal with him at the back. Poole, Montsmar. They bought on it was no surprise they bought on McGrandles. Look at the height of him. They brought him on again to negate any sort of aerial threat that Sunderland were predictably going to throw at Lincoln in the last 15 minutes. We didn't see anything from Sunderland to try and open up Lincoln being a bit more methodical in sense of having someone like Maguire who may win you a free kick around the penalty area and things like that. And that to me was frustrating, because I just felt that Sunderland could have played on till midnight last night and not scored.
Yeah, and I will just before we put a full stop on the Maguire conversation, I will caveat the whole point that Maguire could have easily come on and been a passenger in the game as much as he could have.
Of course, but without trying it, I just feel that exactly. Why put him on the bench? Why if you've got it in your head that he's it's too much of a gamble, why put him on the bench in the first place?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, this is just for argument's sake. Why didn't you put Ollie Younger on the bench, knowing that O'Nien might lose his head, and then you put Younger on and you just have a bit of stability, without having to worry about O'Nien picking up a second yellow card, etc. I just find it. I can't really get my head around why, when you've got Maguire there and he's sitting on the bench, you decide not to use him.
That's exactly the point. That's the whole reason for him being on the bench. You're struggling to create up top, you bring him on to change things. And we were struggling up top, and he wasn't brought on to change things. But there you go. He made the decision, and I suppose he'll always take it.
It might be academic by 6 o'clock on Saturday night, because Sunderland might have beaten Lincoln 3-0, and they haven't used Maguire. But there's clearly a debate to be had about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, just coming back to Lincoln's 2 goals, because the first one, a little bit of a slight catalogue of errors in terms of the headers. They weren't kind of wide and high, which you normally would like defensive headers. They were more central and kind of kept the ball alive for Lincoln without them really doing anything. But I mean, just generally at the back, the calamity of the second goal, Flanagan didn't really give Burge a chance, and then Burge kind of, I don't know whether he either misjudged or completely ignored Johnson, who was charging him down, one of the two, because he smashed the ball straight against him. But I mean, over the last month or so, we have made kind of those errors at the back. But as you said, Luke O'Nien got moved out to full-back. And I mean, I think even though we've been, slightly vulnerable at the back, I think for most, Luke O'Nien's been the stronger of the two in the middle of defence in terms of him and Bailey Wright. It's been Bailey Wright that's kind of been struggling for fitness and to get that sharpness back as he looked at in the first half of the season. But the other thing for me that was clear, especially in the first half, we missed Luke O'Nien's distribution from the back. The amount of times that Tom Flanagan tried to bring the ball out and ended up having to sprint back because he gave the ball away, or Bailey Wright tried a 50-yard diagonal ball, which he tends to love doing, and, we just gave away possession or, whatever. And Luke O'Nien, for all he made the odd laps at the back, he did get us started, in terms of keeping that hold of the ball and making sure that we had periods of possession and we weren't chasing the game.
It's funny. Luke O'Nien always reminds me of Mr. Tickle from the Mr. Men. He's just arms and legs everywhere. It's just sort of there's no sort of coordination. He just throws himself into it, and I think I like that. If it's if you've got someone like Bailey Wright alongside of him, just to bring him in under control, if you like, and I think you're right. O'Nien does bring that to that relationship at the back. The problem with the back four at the minute is it's unstable because it's been so changed because of the injuries. And that I'm not trying to find excuses, but you can't have the disruption that Sunderland have had over the last few months at the back and not expect things to go a little bit awry. And look, Lee Burge, I think it's fair to say, he's not in terms of the calibre that you'd expect. Let's say a McLaughlin brought to the game, although he had a wobble himself. I think. Burge is flawed. There's no question. I mean, Benno raised that last night. What is it about Burge, about him coming off his line? He doesn't command his area. And I thought it was interesting. I know it's unfortunate the emergency loan system works in the way it does, and that Bursic was able to be brought in by Lincoln. But I think it demonstrated when you've got a player like Bursic at the back who did command his penalty area, it does highlight the problems Sunderland have got at the back with their situation with goalkeepers. O'Nien is another enigma, isn't he? I mean, even Lee Johnson admits he just does not know what his best position is. And again, if you then decide that O'Nien's not going to play at centre back, and you decide he's not really a right back, where then does he fit into the midfield system? Because he's brought in Winchester, he's got Scone, he's got Ledbetter. Do we go into next season and feel that Ledbetter, right, okay, his playing days are probably numbered now, and he'll probably go into a more coaching role, and that opens up the door for an O'Nien if he's here. So that all depends on what division Sunderland are going to be playing in next season as well, because there's that huge question mark over O'Nien's future. So there are sort of problems at the back, but I agree with you in terms of O'Nien. I like it when he's focused and he's on the ball and he's in the game. Where I do worry is when he gets frustrated, as he did last night, and picks up. And now, as I say, it's becoming almost an inevitability, mainly because of the way the games are going, that O'Nien's picking up yellow cards. And it's no coincidence that over the last 2 months, his yellow card tally has suddenly doubled. He's now at risk of reaching 10, whereas 2 months ago, you could safely say he was going to go through a game and not trouble the referee. So I think that's one of the indications of the underlying problems that Lee Johnson's had, predominantly over his back four.
Yeah, and kind of sticking with that kind of the mentality aspect of it, right across the squad. One of the biggest concerns for me, and I'm sure it will be for Lee Johnson as well, that when we went 2-0 down, our chins just seemed to kind of hit the floor. Heads were down all over the pitch. Lincoln then seemed quicker to the ball. They seemed sharper. They seemed, we couldn't pick ourselves up. And I don't know if you get a feeling of, are we mentally weak as a squad? I mean, do we have this aspect to our squad where things start to go south, in terms of, like you said, Luke O'Nien, and people get frustrated. I mean, do you think that's an aspect of this squad?
I've seen that this morning. A few people have posted on social media that the squad's mentally weak. I'm not sure I do agree with that, actually, because I think if you analyse the experienced players in there, McGeady, Ledbetter, Power to an extent, I would never label them as mentally weak. I think, far from it. I spoke to Grant after the game, and he was, look, there's no betrayal there of being mentally weak. Believe me, I mean, quite the opposite. And I think it's naivety. I don't think it's mental weakness. I think it's the arrogance of youth, if you like. We mentioned O'Nien. I just think, there are some, you can look at players like, Gooch last night, he ends up playing right back. Well, that's, again, there's a flaw, isn't there, in the squad in the terms of the 18 that's selected. If you end up with, a player who can cause problems in the opposition penalty area playing at right back, that's to me is nonsensical. Again, it comes down to, why aren't you making better use of your substitutes? You've Lee Johnson said how he agonised about who to put on the bench. Well, you agonise for a week about who to put on the bench, and then you don't use them, or you don't use them effectively. I think, going back to the question of mental weakness, I think to have come through 57 games now this season, finished fourth, won a final at Wembley in front of no spectators, and ground out some big results this season. I mean, games like Bristol Rovers away, the way they played at Portsmouth, to come back at Crewe. I think, it's not mental weakness, as I say. I think it's naivety and tiredness. I think, that is an element as well. So, there'll be people, I think, who will be screaming at me and saying, no, they're not strong mentally. I'm just not convinced that's the case. I do think it's down to a combination of, as I say, naivety, tiredness, and I think you've got to point the finger at Lee Johnson to an extent in the way that he set the team up and the way that he handled the situation when they went 2-0 down.
I don't disagree. I think we've got the players there, but I will play devil's advocate that I think Lincoln have played the most games in the country this season. I think there was a stat that went up last night, but just playing devil's advocate on the
you might be right. I'm just thinking, because I know Alex Palmer, who'd been in goal until the injury in training this week, he hadn't missed a game, I don't think, and he played 56 games. So in fact, Lincoln and Sunderland actually played the same number of games, but have Lincoln had the disruption at the back that Sunderland have had? I don't think they have, because just a sort of off on a tangent, Lewis Monsmar and Ioma have basically been the two centre-backs all season for Lincoln. Adam Jackson was brought back in last night purely to deal with Charlie Wyke. Now, we know that because Adam Jackson's dad was sat right in front of us. Benno knows him from when Adam Jackson was at Middlesbrough. And Adam's father was saying the problem with Adam this season, because he signed from Hibs in the summer, the problem Adam's had is niggly injuries. And what happens? Within 15 minutes, he's picked up a niggly injury, which is why Jackson's not been involved. So the back four at Lincoln has been pretty much solid right through the season. Poole, Ioma, Monsmar and Eden. A couple of changes, but on the whole, the changes have generally been when one of those two players is pushed into midfield and they've brought in another defender. They haven't had the level of disruption that Sunderland had. Willis, Wright, Sanderson, Flanagan. Already that's just four players off the top of my head that have had longer term injuries in the season, which completely have disrupted. Hume 5, McLaughlin 6, which has completely disrupted Sunderland's season. And to counter, as you say, your argument, to have that many key players missing for lengthy spells and still finish fourth and be in the playoffs is to some extent quite commendable.
Yeah, I completely agree. And they've got no better opportunity to answer any question marks over their mentality than the game on Saturday as well. But I mean, after the game, you mentioned Lee Johnson's comments, and one of his comments has caused a little bit of controversy on social media. Of course, anything anybody says causes controversy on social media. But he did mention one line. He said, the second leg on Saturday could be one of the greatest nights in the club's history.
Oh yeah,
and I think it's got a few people's backs up. What do you think he meant by that comment?
I think it's a little bit of a backlash of him trying to be upbeat. I think it's just I think you can overanalyze it. I don't think in any sense, shape or form he's trying to belittle anything that's happened before. I think he's just trying to shift the mood. I think he's trying to find a stab at optimism. I think there's no doubt that after the game last night, it was clearly pessimistic. It was clearly down, and everybody's, optimism's the last thing that anybody can think about, having been beaten in the first leg 2-0. And I think it was just he was trying to say that, we've got it within ourselves to do something on Saturday, which is, a little bit against the odds. But if Sunderland do achieve it, people will turn around and say, "Oh, what a great afternoon it was at the Stadium of Light." One of the great afternoons at Sunderland, of which there have been many. And I just think, again, element of naivety. Got to give him some, I think, flexibility here. He's come into the club. He has, as he said, tried to learn. He's trying to learn the history of the club. He's trying to get under the skin. He's trying to find out about its past, and that's all credit to him. And Kiri Louis-Dreyfus is the same, trying to find out more, and they're embracing that aspect of it. And I think, you're bound to put your foot in it, somewhere or another down the line. And I just think it was a natural reaction to the disappointment of losing last night, and trying to find some positive to take into the weekend.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think, if we turn it around on Saturday and we end up being promoted, I mean, if this is, if this means it avoids a more prolonged stretch in the third tier, then it will be a huge night in the club's history, because we don't want any more time at this level. We want to get moving and get kind of the new owners' plans in place higher up the pyramid.
Yeah, and I it's interesting, isn't it? I think we've had this debate. I mean, right from the start, when Gary and I, when Sunderland first went down, talking about they can't stay in this division more than one season. Then it gets to 2 seasons. You can't stay in this division more than 2 seasons. It gets to 3 seasons. Well, it'd be a tragedy. It'll be the end if we're in this league for a 3rd season. Well, there's a possibility they might be in this division for a 4th season, and it won't be the end of the world. They will, we will just get on with it. We will start again in August, and we'll have 46 games ahead of us and the trophy to defend, and so on and so on. But I think, over the summer there'll be a rebuilding. There'll be a completely new look to the team, if you like, in August, if it's a League One campaign. If they do turn it round at the weekend and they do win the playoff final, it'll be a different look team in the Championship, because it has to be if you're going to survive a level up. It's difficult sometimes to quantify it, because I spoke to Grant Ledbetter last night and said to him, this club is too big, it's massive, it shouldn't be in this division. So you've got a chance still to turn it around. And is that a challenge that, as professional footballers, you relish? You're up against it. You've got a cliff to climb on Saturday, but amazing if you could do that, if you could turn it around. This second chance you've got this season to do it. And I think Grant, quite rightly, wasn't quite sure how to answer it, because this question of, are Sunderland too big to be in League One? Yes, they are, but they are in League One. And that's not saying they shouldn't be there. They are there. And until they can prove that they are not a League One club on the pitch anymore, the argument is slightly sort of, it's diluted, isn't it? Because we can't change it. The fact is that, if they're in League One next season, the fixtures will be published. They'll be going to Accrington Stanley. They'll be going to Cheltenham. They'll be going to Cambridge. Well,
Forest Green, possibly.
Yeah, you deal with it. Deal with it. And next season, then you start saying, right, have we got a squad to deal with it and get out finally from League One? But it's a difficult one. It jars. It's horrible, and you go into all these games, and there's no question. I looked at Lincoln last night, and the last time they were in the Championship, or Division 2 as it was 1961. So, it sort of puts some perspective on it, I guess.
But there's still a chance. 2-0 down. First-time fans will be present at the Stadium Light for, 14 months? Something like that?
Yeah.
I mean, you speak to Lee Johnson, obviously, a lot more than I do. You're kind of around people. You're around things. How will he approach Saturday? Because, in terms of our, how we set up, our shape, he hasn't changed it. He's sometimes gone to 3 at the back. He's sometimes tweaked things. But going off yesterday, I mean, it seems like, from the first leg, he needs to kind of really overhaul quite a few parts of the team.
Yes, but what do you think? What do you think?
Yeah.
I'm throwing this back at you. I know what I'm going to say here. I'm almost... Okay, I'll preempt you. I think he'll stick with how he's been working. I just don't... Yeah. I think he is conservative with a small c. I think last night's game almost proved to me, I think, that he is risk averse. I think he doesn't like to... I mean, I say that Flanagan was a gamble and it was a risk, but it burnt his fingers. And I think he will... in terms of who do I think will start the game... Well, I think Flanagan will start again, and I think Wright will start, and O'Nien will be right back. McFadden will be left back. I wouldn't be at all surprised that Winchester comes in for Scowen, although he likes Scowen. I just think Winchester sometimes gives them legs in the middle. But again, it may well be Power and Scowen. It'll be McGeady and Wyke. And I think, he'll probably start Gooch. So I just don't, I can't see where, he's not going to start Maguire, is he? I think that's, I'd be amazed, absolutely amazed if he started Maguire in the game on Saturday. And because he'll be, I think in his own mind, he'll be battling with this. We can't concede the first goal, but we also need to score the first goal. But look, he's the man paid to make the decisions, and there can be 40,000 of us with a view on what the team should be. Ultimately, it's down to one man. It's Lee Johnson. He's going to make that decision.
Yeah, and I mean, the only thing I'll kind of say in terms of how we might set up, I completely agree. I don't think he's going to make too much changes to the shape, but I just think, yes, you were talking about the risk there of conceding one, but I think that the payoff against an early goal for us is so huge that I would like to think that first 10 minutes will be right, in their face on the front foot. Putting them under pressure from the off and build it, because it's the way we play. It's almost about building that pressure up, because we pen teams in and build up the pressure until they give, and one of these crosses eventually lands in the right place, and Wyke's able to put it away. So it's starting to build that pressure up from the off will give us the platform, hopefully, to get that early goal as soon as possible.
I totally agree with you, but I think historically over the last few seasons, how often have we seen the opposition start the brightest at the Stadium of Light? And my fear is Lincoln. I mean, Michael Appleton's not stupid. He knows exactly what Sunderland are like at home, and the record that it was a strange one last night, because I looked at Lincoln's home record and it was poor. I mean, they've only won 9 of their 23 home games, and yet last night, that went out the window. Now Sunderland have got a poor home record. Is Michael Appleton going to look at that and think, right, look, we know where the weaknesses are in Sunderland playing at home. They do sort of feel under pressure at home, and with 10,000 fans in there as well, will that increase the pressure, or will the fans coming, because they're coming back after so long out, will they be so up for it at the start? That's when Sunderland have got to, they've got to use that as a positive. They've got to really draw on that in the first 15, 20 minutes and get back in the game, because the longer that goes on, and that will work against them, and it will work in Lincoln's favour.
Yeah, I was going to say, I imagine Michael Appleton's team talk is going to be, the longer we keep this 0-0, the longer, the fans will get frustrated. Sunderland, the players on the pitch will get frustrated, and then it's in Lincoln's hands from that point. That's going to be their tactics, and it's going to be a no-brainer for Michael Appleton to do that.
And he's got the team capable of doing it. I mean, we've seen, we look at those 3 games up until last night's, and that even that 4-0 game where they could have been 2-0 up would have been a different game. That more importantly for me were the 2 games that finished 1-1, because there isn't a huge amount between the two, but there are certain players that I think, I highlighted last night George Grant, who did stand out because of the way that they play the game and the way they got on the ball and where they used it. And then, and Lincoln have got that ability. There's no question.
And I think the first 10, 15 minutes on Saturday is going to tell us so much, because I do think it's going to be all about momentum, and it's going to be how quickly we come out the blocks, I think, on Saturday. whether we come out tentatively and Lee Johnson says, well, there's 90 minutes and we've got 90 minutes to score 2 goals.
Yeah.
Or whether he wants to get us off the mark early.
It's not over. I mean, I will say and try and be optimistic. It's not over. 2-0 is recoverable. I think 3 would have been, I think my tone would have been completely different. And I think on the basis that Oxford, I think we're all agreeing that Blackpool are through because they've beaten Oxford 3-0. That's probably way too much to overturn. But 2-0, you're still in it. And I think it is recoverable. And I think the 10,000 being back in is, that has got to be seen as a sort of the old cliche, the 12th man, because that really could actually swing things. It could be very important. Yeah,
it's going to be huge. And I know you had a taste of it commentating with fans in the ground, but I imagine you're looking forward to getting back at the Stadium of Light with fans.
Oh, it's been so many words. It's been weird. It's been soulless. There's the one, and it's still thrown me every single game is that, you've had the tannoy, you've had the music, and then suddenly at 3:00 there's silence and the game kicks off. It's just I haven't been able to I still can't get my head around that. It's a very odd, use that word, discombobulating. It is, you feel totally discombobulated in that scenario. And I think, all credit over this season for the players to have played in that sort of that atmosphere, lack of atmosphere, for the number of games that they have. I don't think we give the players sometimes enough credit for, maintaining the standards they have, albeit, technically they might be League One and flawed in so many ways, but even so, at any level, even League Two, to maintain the football and the standards and the consistency that clubs have over this period has been remarkable, really, because knowing from ourselves sitting in empty stadiums trying to conjure up some sort of atmosphere is difficult. So yeah, last night was, I had a real tingle that fans being back, albeit they were all Lincoln fans. It was just made such a difference. It felt like football again. It felt real again.
Yeah, well, it's not over till it's over. I mean, it does have a potential to be, a huge afternoon on Saturday. Like I said, if we get an early goal, things could get interesting. But thanks again for joining us, Nick. It's always a pleasure.
No problem. Fingers crossed the weekend. It's just a shame we can't have 30,000 or 40,000 there, but look, we're hopefully, that'll come back next season. So who knows? Fingers crossed. Everybody who's booked trains and hotels at Wembley, they're not going to be having to cancel.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, enjoy kind of doing your thing in the company of supporters, and unfortunately, I'll have to watch everyone on the box. But it's going to be great to see everyone back in the stadium. But yeah, I hope you have a great afternoon, Nick.
Great, thank you very much. Pleasure.
And thanks again for everyone for listening. I hope we're discussing another game after Saturday. I hope we've got 2 more games to discuss this season, and by Saturday evening we'll know if we're in with a shout or not. But from us for now, it's bye for now.